They say the dead do not speak, but in solitude they do. Beneath the arches of the ancient stone keep, beyond the carved wolf heads that watch the misty sea, a voice lingers, a whisper pressed into every slab and stair, every empty throne. It is the voice of Potema, Queen of Solitude, and for a time, Queen of the Empire. She was not born in shadow, nor did she grow in silence. She was raised in light, in the gleam of gold-threaded banners and the echoing corridors of the white gold tower, where the Septim bloodline twisted like ivy through ambition and betrayal. Potema Septim entered the world in 3E67, the daughter of Emperor Pelagius II and Empress Kizara. Even then, the dragon bloodline had begun to dim, its fire flickering under the weight of a fractured empire. The glory days of Tiber Septim were already becoming legend, and what remained was a court swollen with ceremony, but hollow in command. It was in this world that Potema opened her eyes, a world ruled by the memory of a conqueror and by the cowardice of those who followed him. From the moment she could walk, she learnt to watch. She learnt to listen. Servants spoke of her with unease, noting how the child memorized names with unnatural ease, how she watched adults argue with the stillness of a hawk. In the imperial court, where words were sharper than swords, Potema learned to wield both. Her three brothers, Sepphoris, Magnus, and Antiochus, received their education in warcraft, diplomacy, and ceremony. But Potema carved her own curriculum. She read scrolls of history by candlelight, asked questions that disturbed even her tutors, and studied the subtle art of silence. When to speak, when not to. When a pause could wound more than any word. Even in youth, she was not the girl who chased dresses and dolls. She was the girl who sat beside advisors and counted who flinched when the emperor frowned. In the Wolf Queen series, written centuries later, a Solitude scholar claimed that she once corrected a high priest during a temple sermon and was, to the horror of the clergy, entirely accurate. She was no prophet, but she understood things others refused to see, that power was not inherited, it was built, and that influence once grasped could never truly die. Her mother, Kizara, was a sharp-minded woman from the Redguard Isles of Stros-Mikai, a rarity in the imperial court, and one whose heritage often drew whispers. Potema admired her mother's poise, her unshakable calm, and her refusal to yield to noble prejudice. From her mother, Potema inherited her pride and her understanding that standing still in a world of men was the same as falling. Her father, Pelagius II, ruled with a mixture of weariness and formality. His health failed often, and though his presence loomed over council chambers, it was Potema who noticed how little his voice moved the room. She watched the elder council ignore his commands. She watched generals trade loyalty for land. She watched the empire he ruled from a marble seat slowly lose its teeth. And she began to wonder, not if she would rule one day, but when. She began to ask the questions children were not supposed to ask. If the empire's throne passed through blood, why did weakness inherit it? If the elder council chose its emperors, who chose them? And what if no one did? What if the one who seized it simply held on? It was in these early years that Potema's love for Skyrim took shape. The rugged mountains, the cold blue skies, the people who valued strength above titles. This, she believed, was a place where her ambition would not be called arrogance. Though born in the imperial city, she requested to spend her adolescent years in solitude, under the guise of northern governance training. What she truly sought was distance from the stagnation of Cyrodiil and from her brother's growing shadows. Solitude welcomed her with caution. She arrived not just as a princess, but as a force of presence. There was nothing soft in her voice, nothing unsure in her eyes. She walked the city as though it were already hers, and in time, it would be. She married King Mantiarco of Solitude in 3E97. The union raised eyebrows across the empire. He was older, cautious, and by most accounts, uninspired. Potema was radiant, cunning, and widely feared in the court, but she did not want love. She wanted position. She wanted a stronghold. Solitude, ancient and defensible, was perfect. From its narrow bridges and towering keeps, one could command not only Skyrim's northwest coast, but the minds of the proud Nord Jarls who still kept grudges against Cyrodiil. With Mantiarco, Potema gave birth to a son, Uriel Mantiarco, and almost from the moment he took his first breath, she began preparing him not just to rule Solitude, but to rule the empire. When her father died and her youngest brother Antiochus became emperor, Potema did not celebrate. She wrote no letters of support. She did not visit the imperial city. She simply watched. Antiochus was not a cruel ruler, but he was indulgent. The Brief History of the Empire, Volume 2, describes him as pleasing to the court, but poison to policy. His reign was marked by feasts, festivals, and whispered affairs. He cared more for his own pleasure than for the empire's growing unrest. In Potema's eyes, he was not a threat, he was a placeholder, a stone she could step on, and when he died in 3E120, leaving behind a young daughter, Quintera II, as heir, Potema acted. She declared that the throne rightfully belonged to her son, Uriel. Not as a claim of rebellion, she insisted, but as correction. Antiochus had no sons. Uriel, though his mother ruled from Solitude, had the blood of Septims in his veins. His claim was purer, stronger, and more deserving. But the Elder Council disagreed. Quintera II was crowned empress. For most nobles, that would have been the end. But Potema was not most nobles. She had already fortified Solitude, already seeded whispers among the Colovian estates, already promised gold to captains in High Rock, and already spoken with priests who remembered older rites the Empire had forbidden. The Wolf Queen, Book 3, tells us that her letters became weapons. She wrote to rulers as an equal, not a subject. She sent diplomatic gifts wrapped in veiled threats. She positioned herself not as a rebel, but as the last loyal voice of Tiber's vision. She framed the Elder Council as corrupt, Quintera as illegitimate, and Uriel as the child the Empire deserved. Armies began to march. The War of the Red Diamond had begun. But what most histories fail to capture is the slowness of her descent. Potema did not turn to necromancy overnight. She still hosted public debates in her court, still presented herself as a queen of reason. But behind the tapestries of Solitude, the rituals began. First, small things. Consultations with hedge witches, the collection of certain relics long forbidden by the Mages Guild. Then more. Priests of Arche were dismissed. Burials changed. Doors were built where there were no rooms. Some servants vanished. Others returned changed. The Wolf Queen, Book 5, claims her library began to grow heavy with scrolls from old Nibonese vaults. Scrolls bound in ash and marked with symbols that had been erased from official records. She did not believe she was damning herself. She believed she was preparing for inevitability. if the Empire would take her son's life to preserve their puppet line, then she would command more than armies. She would command death itself. And slowly, she began to do just that. Those who died fighting for her were seen again. Soldiers claimed they saw their comrades rise again, pale and unblinking, guided not by blood but by command. Her court transformed. Nobles were replaced by robed figures who never ate, who never spoke above a whisper. Her son, now declared Emperor Uriel III by his loyalist allies, sat as her mouthpiece. But Potema ruled. From the catacombs of solitude, her power spread. The empire trembled, and Potema, the girl born beneath stained glass saints, the sister once dismissed as too bold, too strange, too dangerous, had become the most feared woman in Tamriel. She had no crown of gold, no formal coronation, but her voice carried farther than any emperor's. Her name was carved in fear, and still, it was not enough. Still, it was not enough. Potema's vision of an empire reborn under her son's rule required more than just war. It demanded permanence. Her enemies had thrones and armies, yes, but they also had time on their side. Age would wear down her generals. Treachery would wear down her alliances. She needed something that would not fade, something eternal. And so she went deeper, not just into the catacombs beneath solitude, but into the older layers of magic that whispered from beyond the veil of death. Not all necromancers sought power for cruelty. Some, like Potema, sought control because the world offered none. If the divines would not ensure justice, she would become the god her son needed. She studied the ancient texts not spoken of in public, fragments of the Book of the Worms, the theories of Manamako's disciples, the rites used by the early Nibonese death cults. She delved into the forgotten disciplines of soul binding, corpse preservation, and spectral communication. Her castle became a hive of quiet rituals and locked doors, and yet she still maintained the surface of civility. Visiting nobles were welcomed with flattery. Letters to distant kings continued, sealed in wax and charm. But behind every smile, there was purpose. Everything she did from this point forward was to secure one thing, that the name Uriel Septim III would be written in every history book, carved into the stone of the empire, and spoken in the tongues of schoolchildren. Even if that meant twisting the world around him to survive. By 3E121, the empire was tearing itself apart. 3 years had passed since Potema's declaration, and the Red Diamond War, named for the jewel on the imperial crown, had consumed the provinces. Sepphoris and Magnus, her own brothers, had taken up arms to protect Kintyra II's claim. Battles burned across Hammerfell and High Rock. Roads that had once carried trade now echoed only with the clash of steel and the hiss of arrows. Towns turned into graveyards. Allegiances shifted like sand, and still Potema endured. Her letters to her son, many recovered centuries later and catalogued in the Solitude archives, were sharp and unemotional. "If the river floods, do not build a dam," she wrote once. "Learn instead to breathe beneath it." Her approach to war was the same. Fluid, precise, merciless. In 3E121, her greatest move came. Through a mixture of subterfuge and military strategy, her forces captured Empress Kintyra II. What followed remains one of the darker episodes in the Septim line. Kintyra was imprisoned in Glenpoint, a city Potema had long since brought under her influence. There she was publicly humiliated, stripped of title, paraded as a fraud, and held as a message to the Elder Council. It was not just a tactical victory, it was symbolic. In the mind of the people, there was now only one clear line of succession, Uriel III. But what Potema had gained in terror, she began to lose in loyalty. Whispers grew louder. Her methods, once seen as clever, were now feared. The nobility who had supported her began to fear they were puppets in a game they no longer understood. Stories began to spread of guards who never blinked, of advisors who never aged, of screams heard beneath the floorboards of Castle Solitude. The rituals she had once kept hidden had begun to leak into the edges of her rule. The facade was crumbling. And when King Tyra II died in captivity under circumstances Potema never confirmed nor denied, the line between queen and villain blurred forever. Still, she did not stop. In 3E127, her son Uriel III was officially crowned emperor by his supporters in the imperial city, though his hold on the throne was tenuous and constantly challenged by his uncles. For 3 years, he ruled in name, but it was Potema's shadow that fell over every decision. She was the architect of his ascent and the voice behind every proclamation. Yet her power was no longer clean. It had become brittle, desperate. The enemy she thought crushed began to rise again. Sepphoris and Magnus regrouped. The people of the empire, long-suffering and war-weary, began to resist, not with swords, but with silence. Trade stopped. Tax revenues vanished. Garrisons collapsed from within. And Uriel, for all his mother's strength, had none of his own. In 3E130, Uriel III was captured after a decisive battle near the border of Hammerfell. While being transported to the dungeons of the imperial city, his prison cart was set ablaze by a mob. He died screaming, burned alive in the armor Potema had given him. When word reached Solitude, there was no outcry, no public mourning. Potema locked her gates. She sent no letters. For the first time in her life, she went silent. Some say she wept, others say she did not speak his name again. But what is certain is this: something inside her broke. She had spent her entire life weaving a future with her son at the center. With his death, the tapestry unraveled. But rather than fade into exile, she went deeper into her darkness. Solitude became a city under siege, not from outside forces, but from within. Those who remained loyal became few, and even they were more afraid than devoted. The rituals intensified. The court ceased to function, no messages came. The outside world stopped calling her Potema. They called her now by the name she had earned, the Wolf Queen, and then nothing. For years. Decades passed with no word from Solitude, and the city was sealed. Ships that docked near her walls were turned away or sank under mysterious circumstances. It was as if the northern coast had been swallowed by fog, but silence is not peace. In 3E137, after years of preparation, the Empire marched on Solitude. Led by her brother Sepphoris, now emperor, an army descended on the city. What they found was not a queen's court, it was a tomb. The streets were empty, the gates cursed, the walls carved with symbols older than the empire itself. They say the air stank of incense and rot, that torches could not stay lit within the halls, that the dead stood guard where the living had long since fled. Potema did not flee. She did not surrender. She fought, not with an army of men, but with those who had died in her service and returned by her will. The Siege of Solitude, as recorded in the Wolf Queen, Book 8, was unlike any battle in the Empire's history. Days turned to weeks. Spells turned the night to ash. Screams echoed from beneath the city stones. And still she endured. When the gates were finally broken and Sepphoris's army flooded the keep, they found no throne, no crown, no corpse. Potema was gone. Or perhaps she had never left. The chambers beneath the castle were sealed with rituals no priest could undo. The dead would not rest, and so the Empire did the only thing it could. They buried it. They closed the catacombs. They locked the doors. And they tried desperately to forget. But you cannot forget a voice that still whispers. Even after the gates of solitude fell and the fires dimmed, the city did not breathe. Potema's court had rotted from within, and her body, though never found, was said to be buried in a sealed crypt beneath the Temple of the Divines, entombed not with reverence, but with fear. The priests dared not speak the rites of Arche over her name. They feared that to name her aloud was to summon her gaze, and for decades they were right to fear. Strange occurrences continued long after the war had ended. Lights flickered in places no torch should reach. Chanting was heard in the deep crypts when no mouths moved. Tombs refused to stay sealed. The dead and did not stay dead. Her legend did not fade. It festered. The Empire declared her legacy forbidden. Her name was struck from court records. The Wolf Queen, they called her. Not in flattery, but in warning. Yet Potema had already achieved the immortality she sought. Not in soul, perhaps, but in shadow. Across Tamriel, stories spread. Some claimed she had become a lich, her soul bound to an ancient relic. Others whispered that her death had never truly come, that she had merged with the very magicka she once commanded, drifting through the veil that separates life and death. The Mages Guild, in secret, classified her rituals as Tier 3 containment hazards. The Synod refused to discuss her altogether. Even the Sigic Order, so rarely concerned with mortal politics, acknowledged her legacy as an aberration of will too focused to decay. But it is not myth alone that carried her through the ages. It is what came after. Her son, Uriel III, was burned alive in a prison cart, a death more symbolic than strategic. The Septim line, despite all Potema's efforts, did not bend to her vision. Sepphoris I restored order to the Empire, though the scars of the Red Diamond War never fully healed. The provinces had seen what ambition looked like when raised from childhood. They had seen what a single will, when unshaken by love or mercy, could do to an empire. And they had seen what happened when death itself became a throne. The rulers that followed ruled more carefully, some say more wisely, but none forgot Potema. The city of solitude was rebuilt, though slowly. The catacombs beneath Castle Dower were sealed with layers of runes, locked by priests and mages together. Few dared descend. The rituals Potema had written, those recovered, were locked in vaults, burned or buried, but some always survived. And in time, her voice returned. Centuries passed. In the Fourth Era, travelers in Skyrim once again spoke of her. In the quiet halls of the Blue Palace, strange noises stirred. The crypts whispered, and then her spirit stirred, not as a ghost of vengeance, but as a fragment of will. The Dragonborn, hero of prophecy, would in time be drawn into those ancient halls, facing what Potema had become, an echo, powerful and unfinished, still bound to her legacy. In the quests chronicled in Skyrim, the last Dragonborn is tasked by Styr, priest of the Temple of the Divines, to enter Potema's ancient crypt and defeat her resurgent spirit. There, the hero discovers the depths of her preparations, her chambers lined with the dead, her voice commanding revenants as if no years had passed. Potema's return is not just a haunting, it is a continuation. She never planned to vanish. She planned to outlast the world that denied her. Even as a fragment, her power remains formidable. When the Dragonborn defeats her, her remains are sanctified in ritual. But even then, Styr admits this is only a ceiling, not an ending. Some spirits are too strong to truly banish. Some names echo longer than bone. She is remembered not as a villain in every corner of Tamriel. In some, she is seen as a woman who refused to be dismissed. A woman who raised herself to power not by charm or inheritance, but through relentless intellect and unforgiving will. In Solitude, the legends paint her darker. Yes, but even there, her name is spoken with a strange mixture of loathing and awe. The Blue Palace still casts a long shadow at dusk, and sometimes, in the silence between bells, one might feel the air shift. Not cold, not loud, just aware. The Wolf Queen did not want forgiveness. She wanted memory. She has it, across eras, across rulers, across silence. Her tale, once censored and sealed, now lingers not only in crypts, but in dreams, in fears, and in the places where power waits quietly to rise again. And as the moons drift above the sea of ghosts, and the wind weaves through the towers of Solitude, her presence still hums, just beyond the veil. Long pause. Even centuries after her fall, Potema's name remains circled in ink and fear across arcane tomes and temple records. She is more than a memory. She is a warning. To mages, her life is studied not just for the strength of her sorcery, but for the force of will that powered it. In the secret halls of the College of Winterhold, certain restricted scrolls mention her only as the Wolf Queen, her true name kept from apprentices to avoid drawing unwanted attention. Her necromantic methods, blending political influence with soul manipulation, are still considered without equal, and her legacy has influenced more than one conjurer across the eras. In Esso's timeline, long before her mortal birth, whispers of a powerful presence were already rooted deep in the culture of Skyrim. Some scholars in the antiquarian circle suggest that Potema's mastery over undeath had precedent in ancient Nordic practices, that her reign in some ways revived rites that had been buried beneath snow and silence for generations. She did not invent fear. She weaponized it. Religious orders, especially those devoted to Arche, regard Potema as the embodiment of violation, the blasphemous inversion of life and death's sacred boundary. The Order of Arche maintains special rites of sealing, designed specifically to contain spirits of Potema's magnitude. These rituals, usually reserved for Daedric incursions, are among the few tools left capable of neutralizing the echoes of her spirit. In the Book of Life and Service, which chronicles the duties of priests who maintain tombs and catacombs across Tamriel, there is a single marginal note beside her name, rebellious of both throne and grave, a line not meant to condemn, but to classify. Potema is treated not as an anomaly, but as a type, a rare category of soul whose refusal to pass on becomes a problem that spans generations. No other mortal ruler occupies such a space. In cultural myth, Potema lives in layered forms among the Dunmer of Morrowind, particularly House Telvanni. She's occasionally spoken of with grim admiration. Not openly, she was an imperial after all, but the Telvanni know power, and they respect those who shape death to their will. In whispered tones, some call her the mortal who understood eternity, a rival not of emperors, but of lich kings and living gods. In contrast, the Nords of Skyrim, particularly those loyal to the temple traditions, see her as a scar, an unnatural corruption of Skyrim's honor. Yet even they admit her strength. She ruled solitude with clarity and iron. She did not pander. She did not falter. For all her defiance, she understood what it meant to hold the North. And that understanding still lingers, carved into the foundation of the Blue Palace, echoing under every throne that followed hers. The Argonians, less concerned with imperial history, tell her tale differently. In the deeper swamps of Black Marsh, where oral tradition twists stories into myth, Potema is remembered not by name, but by shape. She is called the White Howl, a spirit that moves through bones and fog, always female, always hunting, always returning. Her image has merged with their own ancestral spirits. She is not evil, she is hunger. She's the thing that refuses to die. And among the Khajiit, whose lunar cycles define all fate, Potema is sometimes likened to a bent moon, a force that slips outside the natural rhythm, becoming a cautionary tale for those who walk too far from Joan and Jode. They say her soul walks backward across the stars, unable to be reborn. Within the Elder Scrolls themselves, those mysterious prophetic texts housed and read only by the moth priests, Potema's name appears only rarely, but when it does, it carries weight. The Elder Scroll of Almadin, long sealed within the vaults beneath the white gold tower, contains a verse that seems to refer to her. One shall rise, crowned in silence, who rules both womb and grave, her howl folding time in half. Some scholars debate whether this refers to Potema or a Daedric entity, but the phrasing, crowned in silence, has long been tied to her posthumous reign. Silence was her legacy, not peace. A kingdom not of people, but of revenants and quiet loyalty. She ruled even when she no longer lived. There are those, even now, who seek to understand her secrets, not to repeat them, but to defend against what she uncovered. Potema did not simply raise the dead, she transformed death into a tool of state. Her methods revealed the brittle edge between faith and fear, between throne and crypt. She used loyalty the way others used steel. Her servants were not swayed by coin. They were bound by purpose, by belief, by deathless command. In this, she reshaped the definition of rulership. For what is a ruler who is obeyed in life? Potema was obeyed in death. Her words continued to echo long after her voice ceased, her presence long after her breath. Few figures in Tamriel's long and tangled history can claim such reach, yet her tragedy remains, not just for what she became, but for what she lost in pursuit of control. Potema was not born monstrous. She was born brilliant, ambitious, and deeply attuned to the machinery of power. But brilliance, when starved of compassion, calcifies. Her love for her son, once genuine, became a banner under which she justified unthinkable acts. Her desire to preserve a legacy became a war against time itself, and her defiance of death, though awe-inspiring, left her alone. Queen of a kingdom with no voices, no laughter, no living breath. Even her final echo, encountered in the Fourth Era, is not a plea, it is a command. She does not ask for understanding, she demands continuation. When the Dragonborn faces her ghost in Skyrim, it is not a climactic battle, it is a closing loop. Potema's story does not end in flame or silence, it ends in resistance. Her soul, fragmented and bound, still reaches, still speaks. And though it is sealed once more, the world knows this: she may rise again. not because of prophecy, not because of magic, but because her will, once shaped, was never broken. So rest now. Let the wind of solitude carry your thoughts. Let the waves below Castle Dower smooth the stone in your mind. Potema's tale is not just of conquest or undeath, it is a mirror, showing what becomes of brilliance untempered by mercy, of love twisted into legacy, of silence shaped into sovereignty. In the quiet, she waits, not for vengeance, not for peace, but to be remembered. And remembered she is, by crypt, by scroll, by whisper. Long pause. Thoughtful. Even in the endless halls of Elder Scrolls prophecy, where time folds like parchment and history bends to breath, Potema remains. She is not a fixed point, but a curve. A ripple in the currents of fate. The scrolls do not name her as a chosen, nor as a doom. And yet, she exists between those titles, just beyond the language of heroes and villains. In the metaphysics of the Elder Scrolls, where gods wear mortal skin and mortals rise to join the stars, Potema is neither divine nor damned. She is will, crystallized, a mortal force so unyielding that even when stripped of form and family, she moved the world around her. Long pause. Not by prophecy, not by blessing, but by choice. To the moth priests who read the Elder Scrolls, blind but sighted, her echo appears not as a name, but as a shape. A howl without a beast, a crown without a throne, a figure who moved against the thread of history, tugging it out of alignment, fraying its edge. She is not central to the great mythic conflicts, the towers of reality, the dragon breaks, the shattering of Numidium. And yet, her shadow falls across them all. For she reminds the world what ambition looks like when carried not by myth, but by memory. When legend is not granted, but seized. The Daedric princes, so often the architects of mortal downfall, did not create her. She is not a servant of Molag Bal, or a champion of Mannimarco. She walked no path ordained by Vaermina or Mephala. If she heard their whispers, she did not answer. If they offered her power, she did not bow. That too is what makes her rare. Most who tread the line between life and death fall because they are tempted by things beyond themselves. Potema fell inward. She found her darkness not in oblivion, but in solitude. In later years, some mystics would compare her to the tribunal of Morrowind, not in godhood, but in determination. Vivek, Sothasil, Almalexia, they too reshaped the world through belief in their own necessity. But Potema never claimed divinity, she claimed right, and in claiming it, she unmade the Empire's peace, cracked the bones of succession, and birthed a war that changed Tamriel forever. Her impact was not in magic alone. It was in the fear she inspired, the respect she demanded, the silence she left behind. And so she remains, not alive, not truly dead, but echoing, whispered in the arcane academies of Cyrodiil, cautioned against in the crypt rituals of High Rock, felt in the way the blue palace darkens just before nightfall, as though remembering. And you, dear dreamer, you have walked her story now. You have traced her rise through velvet halls and her descent into candlelit stone. You have followed her voice from cradle to crypt, from laughter to silence, from empire to echo. Softly rest now, long pause. As dawn nears, remember this, even the strongest voices fade, but those who listen can still hear them. Sleep well, dreamer. The Wolf Queen waits no longer. Whispered, she has spoken. And yet, even after all this time, after her bones crumbled to dust and her name was carved into legend and fear, Potema Septim remains more than a chapter in the annals of history. She has become a presence, not merely recalled by scholars, but felt in the stillness of stone halls, in the flicker of blue flame, in the cold silence that settles over solitude when the bells stop ringing. Hers is not a tale of a tyrant, nor simply a necromancer's rise. It is the story of a woman who would not surrender, neither to death, nor to fate, nor to the expectations written for her in the blood of emperors. She was born into power, but refused to be its servant. Instead, she bent it, reshaped it, and when denied, took it by force. And when even that slipped from her grasp, she reached beyond the veil, demanding that her story continue, even if her body could not. She's often remembered only by her rebellion, her undead armies, her war against the Empire, her fall. But what lingers longer is the clarity of her purpose. Potema did not act from madness nor from chaos. She acted with intent. She believed her son should rule, and she gave everything, her title, her alliances, her soul, to see it done. Even when the empire resisted, even when the people turned, she remained unshaken. That is the part of her legacy that still unsettles historians and mages alike. Not the horror she became, but the unwavering certainty with which she became it. Long pause. For many, that is the most terrifying thing of all, not the dark magic, not the raised dead, but the knowledge that one mortal by will alone could hold a kingdom hostage long after her own heart had stopped beating. And so she lingers, not only in ghost stories or catacombs, but in the bones of the empire itself. Every ruler who has sat upon the ruby throne since has done so in her shadow. Her rebellion fractured the Septim line. Her legacy forced new laws of succession. Her memory still gives priests pause before they speak the names of the dead. Potema is not gone. She's woven into the Empire's caution, into the way the guards walk past sealed doors in solitude, into the way nobles avoid discussing the War of the Red Diamond, into the way the people of Skyrim still leave offerings at shrines, not out of piety, but out of fear that silence might one day no longer be enough to keep her asleep. In Skyrim, her spirit returns, summoned not by ambition, but by the unfinished threads of her will. In death, she remains a queen. Her commands are obeyed. Her presence is felt. And when the Dragonborn faces her in the depths beneath solitude, it is not to vanquish a ghost. It is to confront a history that refuses to rest. Her laughter, hollow and regal, echoes through crypt halls lined with death. Her voice, measured, unhurried, calls not with hatred, but with certainty. She's not surprised to be remembered. She expected it. She built her eternity upon it. And even in that final sealing, when the Dragonborn drives her back into the dark with the aid of Arkay's light, there is no cry of defeat, only quiet, as if she has merely stepped away until the world forgets once more. And when it does, when time smooths over the memory of her defiance, she will return. That is the promise she left behind, not in words, in silence, in echo. So now, as your breath slows and your thoughts drift like leaves on the Karth River, remember her not only as a tyrant or a queen, but as a soul who defied endings. Let her story settle in your bones, not as fear, but as reminder. That legacy is not always chosen. That memory is a kind of magic, that some voices do not fade even in death. The Wolf Queen rests again, for now, and so too should you. Long pause. Let the wind carry her away. Let the stone grow still. Let your dreams remain untouched. As dawn nears, remember this. Even silence has a ruler, and she wore a crown of whispers. Softly, Sleep well, dreamer. You have walked with the Wolf Queen and survived. Whispered, rest